little note to add here. We talked about a regime change. It's expected that the NBA's basketball operations president, Joe Dumars, who's a Louisiana native, according to ESPN's Shams Charania, is finalizing a deal to become the new head of basketball operations and just president for the New Orleans Pelicans. At that point, we can start to figure out if they're going to keep Willie Green or if Joe Dumars is going to go into somebody that he might have previously worked with. As Joe Dumars is, at this point, 61 years old, from the Bad Boy Pistons. As an executive, though, he was the exec for the Pistons when they won a championship, and that's Larry Brown. It's not like he's bringing Larry Brown back from those seasons, but one could imagine that the Pistons those years would have had a coach or two that is still in the league. Like Rick Carlisle was the head coach one of those seasons, so maybe he poaches somebody from the Rick Carlisle coaching staff or tree. We'll hop into the rest of the video. Yo, what's going on, guys? And today we'll be doing my off-season preview for the New Orleans Pelicans, and they just fired their GM. Yes, the news, David Griffin is out of NOLA. What are your thoughts down below in the comment section? What do you guys expect from the New Orleans Pelicans? Do you guys think at this point Willie Green will also be fired? There was reports coming out that they were frustrated now in retrospect that he had played Jose Alvarado over Dyson Daniels. And I wonder if we're going to see a regime change we're already seeing a regime change in terms of at the top, but let's see if it's a full cleaning house. Now, the report from Will Guillory and Christian Clark that the Pelicans have fired Executive Vice President David Griffin after missing the playoffs 4 times in 6 years. Willie Green, who was hired in the summer of 2021, remains uncertain. Griffin's dismissal means the Pelicans will search for a new lead voice in the front office. The Pelicans obviously have to decide moving forward with the non-guaranteed contract of Zion Williamson after another injury-riddled campaign. In his 6 seasons with the Pelicans, Williamson has missed more games, 268, than played, 214. Obviously, for the most part, when he's played, he's been dominant. However, it hasn't led to success. And DeJounte Murray popped his Achilles. They traded Brandon Ingram. This was a team that had 49 wins in 23-24. And they're looking, in my opinion, to put together a new identity under David Griffin. They went 209 and 263. He was hired in 2019. In the first 4 months of his job, he got himself Zion Williamson, traded Anthony Davis for Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, Lonzo Ball, and a first-round pick. Then, obviously, everything went wrong. So, with injuries with Zion, and there was good stuff, though. They drafted Trey Murphy, and obviously it didn't work out with Dyson Daniels, but they flipped him for DeJounte Murray, and they drafted Jordan Hawkins, Yves Messi. They found Najee Marshall and Jose Alvarado. So there was good parts to all this, in my opinion. I think if you look at it negatively, it's not entirely David Griffin and his team's fault. Now, let's talk about this season. What was the lineup moving forward? I have no idea with DeJounte Murray what's going on there. Will he be back next year? Because I think from the time period he tore that Achilles, he'll have to sit out next year or come back at the very end. So I expect their lineup moving into next season, if this is their team, CJ McCollum, who's the reliable veteran scorer and a perimeter shot creator. Trey Murphy, their dynamic two-way wing, who's an elite shooter, who puts out a lot of shots on a high volume, average 21, 5, and 3.5 assists. CJ averaged 21 and 4. Herb Jones at small forward. He's a guy who can guard 1 through 4. He's a defensive ace. He'll fill the gaps. He averaged 10, 4, and 2 steals. He's a plus defender. while Zion Williamson averaged almost 25, 7, and 5. He's that mismatch nightmare, interior force. And Yves Messi, who averaged 9 and 8 with 1.5 blocks, and emerging big with elite rebounding and rim protection potential. Off the bench, this is kind of what they had this year. Jose Alvarado, who averaged 10 points, 5 assists, who's a high-energy backup big, who's a defensive disruptor. Kelly Olynyk, a stretch big with high IQ and passing skills, 11.6 rebounds, 4 assists. Bruce Brown's a free agent. I don't expect him to come back. Jordan Hawkins, a second-year player with the green light, 11 points, 6 3-pointers a game on 33%. And then Keon Brooks was solid in his 10 points and 4 rebounds. Brandon Boston, 11 points, 1.5 steals. I think Jeremiah Robinson-Earl was probably poached by a contender, but he averaged 6 and 5. Karl Matikovic is someone I love. He averaged 19 minutes, 8 points, 5 rebounds, 1 block, and could jump out the gym. Antonio Reeves averaged 7 points and 40% from the field. So they also signed Alfred Payne to a 2-year deal. He has a low shooting percent, but that high assist rate at 8 assists a night is very interesting to see how that all looks. And with the Pelicans right here being a team now having fired their coach, Brandon Boston has a team option. They'll bring him back. Keon Brooks is a restricted free agent. So is Jamal Cain. Alfred Payne has a team option. So the assumption is they'll bring them back. And they were supposed to at least be a play-in team, and then they lost at one point. DeJounte Murray, Zion, Herb Jones, Brandon Ingram, and Jose Alvarado. Eventually they traded Brandon Ingram and lost DeJounte Murray for the season. And only 3 players played more than 60 games, in Jeremiah Robinson-Earl, Yves Messi, and CJ McCollum. So the injuries resulted in New Orleans Pelicans starting 47 different lineups. I wonder, this gap year could be viewed similarly to how the Grizzlies were able to use it and get themselves a guy like Zach Edey. Maybe they can do the same, or maybe package the pick in DeJounte Murray's contract for a player of value. Now, the Pelicans are going to have 12 players under contract. They'll be $3 million below the tax. I don't think they're going to make the goal to bring back Bruce Brown to a contract, as he's going to command more than $5 million a year on annual salary. I think for them, the Pelicans have the $14.1 million non-tax mid-level exception available to use. However, using more than $5.6 million will trigger the first apron, and they're currently $9.2 million below. And the Pelicans have 3 trade exceptions, one for $13 million, one for $9.9 million, and one for $2.1 million. You can't aggregate them, but you can use one in a trade. And they currently are hard capped at the first apron and can't take back more than $5.7 million in salary in a trade. That first apron restriction will expire on June 30th, which is, the start of the new year. I think at this point, it's either deciding if you're going to go forward with the Zion or if you're going to do a full-fledged rebuild. And with David Griffin being ousted, I think that timeline or decision will be interesting, because if they can figure out the blueprint, it's really just getting a lot of shooters and guys who don't need the ball to create, and just defenders around Zion, while maybe getting some younger guys. CJ McCollum can get an extension. I don't know if that's really someone you want to give an extension to, just because he's a little bit older. But this is a team, obviously health is the largest part thing. But in an interview with DeMarcus Cousins, Boogie told me the biggest problem with this New Orleans team is that they're the step sibling to the New Orleans Saints, and it's always going to be that way. So I don't blame the lack of success on the players when the organization isn't probably giving them the best resources to win or compete or to stay healthy as a result of that. I think the other thing is becoming a good defensive team and just having they had this grit, but at one point I think they've lost a lot of their 3-point shooting. They're starting to get it back. They had the lowest defensive rebounding percentage, so I think getting bigger, they've never had especially since Jonas Valanciunas left, And that was part of the reason why they brought him in. They wanted a big presence, but like he wasn't the floor spacer that they, or like a guy able to play with Zion because they clogged up the paint and they gave up the second list points in the paint. So, and the Pelicans are last in defensive efficiency, last in transition defense, and 29th in rim protection. So they own all the first round picks, and from the Ingram trade, the Pelicans have the 2027 top 4 protected first from Indiana, and that is top 4 protected in 2028 if it's not conveyed in the following year. That will send the most favorable of their own to Milwaukee, to Atlanta in 2027. That is top 5 protected. And the Pelicans also have the right to swap first in 2026 with Milwaukee. So in total, New Orleans has 6 firsts and 4 seconds available to trade. And just looking at that, we already know look, I personally think there isn't a big fish that's going to become available. That's the whole thing. You decide if Zion, and we talked about it. I've been told the most likely package. So organizations usually do trades with the same organizations, and the Pelicans have a really good relationship with the Portland Trail Blazers. And allegedly, there's a trade on the table from Portland that's still standing for Zion, and that's the most likely. If it's not Portland, my assumption would then have to be he'd send him to one of his hometown teams, and that's either Charlotte or Atlanta. And they almost sent Brandon Ingram to Atlanta. And Brandon Ingram I assume the package was around Bogdan and DeAndre Hunter. Now that obviously that didn't happen, they do have other contracts that they can put together. So, and they'll have some cap space. Atlanta's one, Charlotte, there's the Miles Bridges contract. And then when you go to guard, if you were trying to move DeJounte Murray, or even if you're looking for a big, by the way, Nick Claxton, I think was the open secret that they were long-term admirers of his. But that's where I sit here, and I think you have to wonder if you're trying to upgrade the roster. Okay, you go and get yourself, but you have East Messi, so why go get Nick Claxton now? You were trying to find maybe a backup or another center, or just sign like a Clint Capella in free agency. Now, I think the other thing is that you are probably thinking, what about a guy like, I don't know, a point guard? There isn't really that many like capable that are going to be available, and that's the biggest question. So that's where I'll leave y'all.